Alrighty. Hello and welcome everyone to this edition of the Credit Union Connection. I am your host, Sarah Snell Cooke, and I am here today with Michael Wolsten of Michael Wolsten Consulting. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm.
Yeah, gosh, I love helping support credit unions all across the country. And what we do is focus on strategic planning and making sure that you have the right people and the right culture and really the right service in place, which is just so critical. I got to work for one of the largest credit unions in the country at Idaho Central Credit Union for 14 years. So I got to see kind of all the patterns, kind of what, really worked and some of the things that didn't along the way. And so I just love having that passion and being able to serve credit unions who I believe missionally serve just a huge portion for what our country needs, which is being member owned. There's not a lot of entities that are like that, right? So that's a little bit of what I get to do, and I love doing it every day.
Yeah, I have to say I think a lot of us consultants started out seeing what we liked and didn't like and decided to carry it off to
Mm,
to all the companies. So
absolutely.
I know you cover a wide swath of services at your consulting firm. The first thing I want to touch on though, since we're in that season, is strategic planning.
Yeah.
And so what are what are a couple of things, and I know that every crane's different, yada yada, but what are a couple of things that every crane needs in their strategic plan for 2025 and beyond?
Oh, absolutely. Well, one of the big ones is probably succession planning as part of strategic planning. I know there's been a lot of focus on that. I know you guys with CU Connection have been talking about that quite a bit as well, with some of the changes that are coming, for federal credit unions, but really, especially for those small, medium-sized credit unions, it's so critical because anytime you have, a sudden change or you have a departure, you have something in the C-suite, and really even for the board, it can create some big changes. And I've seen that firsthand with a lot of the credit unions that I've worked with, is that they're saying, hey, we want to be prepared, but we don't really have some of these next level pieces that we need if unfortunately something big happens or if we lose some key members. And so, that's really, I think, a critical piece. I always say looking at the past, present, and future is so important. Sometimes credit unions are so forward focused that they don't take a moment to look backwards and say, well, what are some of the things that we want to do more of? What are some of the things that worked really well over the last 3 years that we don't want to lose and we want to make sure are built into some of our planning? I think that's really critical. And then I think, probably the biggest one is I call it the big five. This is what I focus on specifically with planning, and everybody does it a little bit differently. Just even having a plan is really helpful. But how do you have a really efficient plan and one that people want to get behind? And what I found is if we're focusing on culture, we're focusing on service, we're focusing on growth and kind of the sales piece, we're focusing on the financials, which is obviously always really important. Well, those first three really feed into the financials, right? And so we have to make sure that that's consistent. And then what's the systems? What's the technology? What's some of those bigger expenditures that we're going to focus on? And then how do we do that in a real responsible way over the next 3 years? And making sure that everybody gets that buy-in. I really love making sure that everybody's heard. So I survey the C-suite, I survey the board, I survey a lot of time frontline team members. What do they see? What do they want to see more of? What do they see as some of the strengths, and how can we grow? Because once we kind of do that collectively for everyone, then when once we present that plan, there's a lot more buy-in because everybody already feels like they're part of that process. So I think those are some really critical areas for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also part of the culture is, bottom up, top down.
Yeah.
And so uh so I love what you were talking about with it all being aligned, because one of the things, I mean, at least in my area of the credit union business, is one of the first things, credit unions often will say they want to grow or they want to reach a certain market, but then they cut back their marketing the minute anything gets a little tight. And I'm sure it's not the only area. But yeah, like how do you ensure that the budget is aligned with what your strategic
Absolutely.
plans are for? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll bake in some of those specific action steps and some of those programs, some of the pieces that we're wanting to accomplish in those big five areas into the budget ahead of time, because you have to do some of the pre-work and say, hey, we really want to, roll out this new initiative, or we want to focus on growth. Well, what does that growth plan actually look like? What does the marketing look like? And I think to your point, if you don't budget it in for next year and have a vision, the money's not going to be there. You can have all the best of intentions in the world, but that's not going to be in place. And so it's really important to allocate those dollars ahead of time. It's really important to know who the action owner is. So not just the CEO, which sometimes happens where everything kind of gets plopped onto the CEO. Who are some of the key owners that can move some of these initiatives forward? And then what are the milestones along the way? What does success actually look like? Right? Is it our
Mhm.
target towards how many new members we have? Is it certain activities? Is it a certain revenue goal, or our goal for net income? What is that? And
Right.
so if we don't have some of those key pieces in place, it's really challenging to be able to look ahead to the next year and say, well, here's what success was, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And, I think it's very important what you said also. There is the outcome is not necessarily 18 different email campaigns throughout the year. The
Right.
outcome is what is the revenue generated by those, or what are the number of loans generated, or however you're measuring that success. And it certainly isn't putting out a certain number of campaigns.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
and so, how do you go about doing strategic planning without putting too much of yourself into it? I feel like I might have a little too much influence on things if I were to do it. How do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's great. So I do two pieces that are a little different. Not everybody does it this way. And again, there's lots of different ways to do it. I won't buy in. I want a plan that everybody gets so excited about because number one, they've contributed to it and we've asked them some of those deeper questions. Part of it's SWOT analysis questions. Part of it's what they want to see. Part of it's maybe what are some, I kind of call them stub toes. What are some of the areas that we really need to improve for our team members or for the credit union? And if we can get that up front first, then we have a lot of great data to move forward in. And then it's really, we're moving the credit union forward from some of the bigger stakeholders. And then the second one is I do a pulse survey. And so I survey the entire team. A lot of times I'll survey different segment groups and I'll say, hey, from the board's perspective, what are some of the pieces that you feel like are really beneficial for the credit union? Or I'll do a pulse survey for the team and I'll ask them questions like, do they feel really valued in the work that they're doing? Do they feel like they have support through their career? Do they feel like their managers producing some really effective one-on-one time? Because culture specifically, which I believe is the biggest driver for credit union success, credit unions are very mission driven. And if you can get everybody behind your mission and your goal, holy moly, like you don't have to, go as crazy with some of the other areas because you have everybody moving forward together. And so what I want to know is what's sort of the ground truth and how bought in are people to begin with? Because if we can know that and we can know where we want to go, now we have a lot more ammunition when we're putting the plan together. And it's not just well, we got to put this plan together, right? I hate I don't know about you, but I hate attending. I'm on some boards as well, not credit union boards, but other nonprofit boards. And there's nothing worse than sitting in a meeting all day and putting a plan together and then it being like, well, that wasn't really inspiring. And that wasn't really something that people are going to move forward with. And that this is probably going to collect dust, and just sit on some shelf. It needs to be kind of like a living, breathing action plan everyone in the organization and everyone can easily see, oh, this is my part in that. Oh, this is what I'm going to own. Oh, this is where we're going. Oh, this is why that's important. And if we can do that, then I think, that can really be transformative and has been for actually quite a few of the clients that I've gotten to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's very
yeah.
important for the CEO and others in the C-suite to emphasize the importance of actually putting together, the tactics to fulfill the strategic objective. Very important for the follow through. Yeah, and you definitely don't want it sitting there collecting dust. And I think I'm going to steal that term, stub toes. I
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah, they're the worst, right? And they're not going to
Yes.
kill you, right? There's not like, oh man, I got to go to well, I don't know. Maybe if you break a toe, maybe you got to go to the hospital. But for the most part, they're just going to be really annoying, but it's really kind of painful. And every organization has them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a team who doesn't have a stub toe, right? It might be operationally, it might be with culture, it might be with, hey, how are we really growing? And that's growth is such a big piece, right? For so many credit
Mm-hmm.
unions and wanting to grow and needing to scale and grow. Otherwise, there might be, well, we've got to merge with someone else, or gosh, we can't keep up with some of the regulatory burdens or whatever it might be. But there's a certain way to do that that's not just a continual shot in the arm of, spending money and like you mentioned, the 50 email campaigns. Email campaigns can be amazing, right? And marketing is amazing. And there's so many things you can do. And that should be supplemented with an amazing place for people to walk into, right?
Mhm.
Once they open up the email, once they go into that
Yes,
place. Hey, it needs to be a culture where people are staying, right? You're not
yes.
having a lot of turnover and new faces, right? It needs to be a culture where, man, people are really excited about offering those products and services, right?
Mhm.
And they're the ambassadors. They're wearing the hat and the t-shirt, right?
Mhm.
And they're kind of the raving fans. If you can have those elements all together through your plan, and that's where the real growth happens.
Yeah, when you take care of your people, for sure. It sounds trite, but definitely the money follows. I feel like. And speaking of that, you started to talk a little bit about succession planning and leadership development, kind of how important that is in the role, and having a culture, obviously, of education and moving forward and upward, and supporting people. So many cranes are emerging out of existence right now, and one of the larger reasons is because they can't find a leader, but they did nothing to find a leader. Whether it's internal or outside. So how do you go about like some really solid succession planning to ensure you have somebody either to move upward or out finding somebody who's going to maybe be that next person?
Absolutely. Yeah. Two clients that I can think of that come to mind. One's a credit union in New York and one's a credit union in Detroit. And both of them have longer standing CEOs. Both of them are nearing retirement. And both of them said, we don't really have a plan, right? We don't even know exactly who that person's going to be internally. And they knew that they would love to have someone internal because you can have external hires and a lot of times that can work out great. And sometimes it's not the right fit, right? And they really both had a desire for it to be more homegrown. And
Mhm.
so they engaged with us about a year and a half ago, and we built out the plan. We said, hey, worst case scenario, here's where things are at. We built out the policy for succession planning. We built out kind of the succession board, who's ready now, who could be ready down the road, those types of things. But when we did some of those exercises, they're like, we don't have anybody ready now. We need some help with that. And that's where I love coming and supplementing the executive coaching piece to say,
Mhm.
hey, who are those people who are maybe on the C-suite deck or close to that you really want to develop over the next 12 to 18 months and really help them be ready for that role? How do we build out some development plans for them? Because I found it's pretty common, unfortunately, a lot of times for the C-suite to focus on development plans for mid-level managers, maybe even frontline folks, and kind of developing them up so they can grow in different areas. But for the C-suite, sometimes that's lacking because they're just so busy and they don't
Mhm.
really have a specific plan on here's the areas that I need to grow in to move forward in my career. I need to be stronger in delegation. I need to be stronger in how I'm helping hold my teams accountable. I actually have a really hard time having difficult questions or difficult conversations with folks, and
Mhm.
how I coach. And so sometimes there's just some of those gap areas. And if we can help support those folks who are next up, or that we've identified that the board has said, gosh, it would be great if we could develop someone in house, then now we can actually grow from the inside out and be proactive in some of those areas instead of, like you mentioned, gosh, we had a change, something happened, someone retired, and now we're looking, and we don't really quite know exactly what we're looking for.
Mhm.
And that can happen too. I'll work with clients where maybe we haven't done that work, the development piece proactively, but now when we're in the CEO hunt stage and we're looking ahead to succession planning, what does it look like not only to fill that role, what kind of CEO do they want to have, but then now that we've kind of gone through that exercise, who is the bench? Who do we want to develop? And what could that look like as we move forward?
So anyway, I
Uh,
do want to get to executive coaching because I think it's an
yeah.
interesting topic. And but I want to go back one smidge about the
Okay.
NCUA reg. They had
Mm,
recently provided a rule that requires succession planning. Um,
right.
what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's great. Now, as someone who is very freedom loving, I sometimes I have a hard time with things being regulated, right? Or like the government's telling
Sure.
us that we have to do that. So that part's a little hard. At the same time, I believe that the statistic is, 30 to 40% of credit unions don't have any sort of strategic plan, right? The board hasn't aligned. And that's a really important function. And this is a really challenging place for CEOs to be put in. Right. It's, hey, this is maybe my legacy or my timeline of what things can look like. I don't know exactly what the board wants for that next CEO or even for some of the C-suite positions, some of these key positions. How do I navigate that? And so I'm a big fan of number one, having a plan, but a lot of times bringing in someone from the outside is so helpful because then what you can do is, again, see sort of that ground truth of where are things at for the C-suite. bringing in some key assessments and knowing exactly where folks land in sort of their capabilities for some of those executive functions. What does the board want for now? But then also, what do they want to see longer term? And I think those conversations are so critical, because if they don't happen, then a lot of times it can put a credit union in a place where they do need to merge and be absorbed. And so, while I don't love it being forced, I do think it's, number one, a great conversation, and I think it's great to be proactive on it, because it's not going away, right? And there will be continued changes that need to come. And if you can be ahead of the game with that, gosh, it's such a better place to be.
Yeah, I'm just so upset that the NCOA had to do something
Yeah,
because
yeah, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, yeah, yeah,
it really is
absolutely,
so important. And not only for having that succession plan, but also for all credit unions that, as they merge away, there's
yeah,
other dangers that we could face. And like I said, a lot of that
absolutely,
is due to the lack of succession planning and boards as well. You need to make sure you can find enough board members. That's been a situation as well in some of the credit
absolutely,
unions, which is interesting.
yeah,
But anyway, so
absolutely.
I'm going to jump back forward
Okay.
into executive coaching.
Yeah.
So talk about, for people who have never done it, what the goal of executive coaching is like and what it might look like.
Absolutely. Well, I firmly believe that people are put in leadership positions for a reason. Typically, they're the right people at the right place at the right time, with some exceptions. I mean, there's some folks who maybe don't have the right fit, or, maybe they're not in the right role. But for the most part, if they're leading and doing some things, and having some good things happen in a credit union, they're there for a reason. And so my goal is to help equip those folks. And what I find a lot, it just maybe an analogy that helps, is a lot of times the CEO has been able to kind of climb to the summit, right? And they've been able to do a lot of the work and lead, but they're kind of like, how do I, number one, transfer all of the knowledge? How do I transfer in a really systematic way what I've done to my team? And how do I help develop them so that they can climb to the top of the mountain as well? Maybe
Mm,
not specifically as the CEO, but that they can really master their position.
yeah.
And so there's some gap areas, and that's true for any leader. And so what I do is help say, hey, I can help kind of be that guide. I can help along the way. I can help, if we're using the climbing analogy, right? Hey, I've got the equipment. I know how to scale the summit. I know how to make some of these things happen. Do you need some additional support along the way? And so what we do is we talk about some key coaching frameworks that really work consistently time over time. And I can kind of reference that a little bit with my time at Idaho Central. We opened, gosh, I think I helped open 20 different locations over the course of those 14 years. So we expanded pretty quickly and organically. And what I learned was some of the really key things that always help, and developed my own frameworks to say, gosh, when we're looking to hire folks, when we're looking to coach people, when we're looking at our own development, when we're looking at difficult conversations, there's just certain things that always work. And so there's some things that are, again, stub toes, or some things that can really hold us back. And so what I like to say is I help accelerate the process. I believe everybody is very capable as leaders and can grow, and everybody has amazing capacity. I just shrink the time. So I
Hmm.
make it more intensive and focused, and say, what could we get done over the next 6 months to
Hmm.
help your executive team grow and help you achieve certain results? And so a lot of times we'll focus our time on what results we want to see. Hey, we want to see culture grow in some of these areas with those benchmarks I was sharing, to some of these key areas. Hey, we want to see profitability, or net income be able to grow in some of these key areas. We want to be able to see growth happen at a stronger place. Hey, we want to measure service to a higher level, right? Hey, maybe measure, it's being measured in some ways. But here's what we want to accomplish. Because I always believe in tying coaching to a result.
Hmm.
Coaching on itself is great, but if you don't have a benchmark that you're focusing on that has a real world, tangible, something you can kind of hold, then
Hmm.
sometimes it can sort of feel like it's a luxury, or it's a, well, that's nice if we get to do that. Well, if you're looking to grow in some key areas, you need to have some of those key metrics. And then obviously you want to have a real set plan on, here's what we're focused on each month, that's progressively helping us
Hmm.
grow individually, but obviously as a team as well.
Yeah, and one of the things I've heard from some of the executive recruiting teams is that, the credit unions, as they get larger, the C-suite gets so specific in its different verticals that they're seeing fewer and fewer people actually prepared for the CEO. position if that's what they want. So I think it's really interesting, like you were saying, that ensuring that the next level is ready to go. Or, you
Right.
know, I guess again, you can do it from outside, and it can be successful. But I feel like having the comfort of somebody internally might be a better
Yeah.
choice because you do. I mean,
Yeah.
what can you learn from somebody in a couple interviews versus working with them for 10 years?
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
think,
there's,
mhm,
yeah, to your point, there's more risk. And again, there's been a great CEO. I can think of, a handful of CEOs that I know who have moved into new roles in new organizations, right? And they made that jump over and are doing a great work. And
mhm,
so, but it is more risk because you don't quite know, right? And
mhm,
so and the success rate of those CEOs moving over sometimes is lower than if someone's developed in-house, and you can really focus on, hey, we know who they are, we know that they align with the culture, because that's probably one of the biggest pieces, right?
right.
Is does somebody align with the culture and can help drive it forward? Can help drive the credit union forward in a way that brings everybody along too.
Mhm.
I've seen that happen as well sometimes. Is there's not that alignment, and so that can be really challenging. So
Hmm.
yeah.
For sure. Um, and so I allow all my guests a final thought at the end of our recording. Um, we talked about a lot of different things: strategic planning, succession planning, budgeting, leadership development, culture, executive coaching. So any of those, you give us a
Yeah.
well-rounded final thought for the
Yeah.
audience, please.
Oh, great question. Well, for the credit union obvious, audience, and obviously I have a big heart for credit unions specifically, and just for the work that's being done. So first off, I wanted to just say thanks to everyone in the credit union industry. It's really rare, and I just feel very fortunate that we get to, be helping members in different ways. Again, I don't work at a credit union at the moment, but I feel like I get to do that through proxy a bit with the clients that
Hmm.
I get to serve, and so I just, want to say thanks for that. And then, parting note, I would just say there, because we're member owned and because there's such that responsibility, I think it's so important for credit union leaders to reinvest in yourselves. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. It could be through executive coaching or planning or different elements, but even taking as little as like 30 minutes every week and saying, this is the time that I'm going to focus on being a better leader. This is the time I'm going to take to focus on learning something new. This is the time I'm going to take to be strategic, because I find that that's one of the biggest areas and issues that CEOs can have is slowing down enough, and the C-suite specifically, to slow down and help be creative in some of that thought and really reinvest and kind of re-energize themselves, which helps them be even better leaders and helps them have even better outcomes. So that would be my final thought. No matter what you decide to do as a leader, having just even that little bit and building that over time can make such a difference for you and for your organization.
Absolutely great thought. Great final thought. Thank you, Michael, so much. I appreciate you coming.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.